The vault opens, the meridian cut through the void like a surgical blade, its sensors sweeping the dead zone where three empires met and none bothered to claim. Protocol Master Vex stood at the observation deck, mandibles clicking in the precise rhythm that indicated mathematical satisfaction. In 17 years commanding research vessels, he had learned to recognize patterns in cosmic debris. This wreckage was different. "Signal analysis complete," announced Kess from the communication station, her chitinous exoskeleton reflecting the pale glow of holographic displays. No radiation spikes, no weapon signatures, no distress beacon. "Derelict classification?" Vex asked, though he already knew the answer. "Affirmative. The vessel has been inert for approximately 3 centuries, hull integrity at 62%. Life support systems in hibernation mode." Vex's antennae twitched. A Kethian ship from the old era would have decayed to cosmic dust by now. This vessel bore the architecture of a species he'd only seen in historical databases. Smooth curves, biological integration with metal, inefficient aesthetic choices. "Human, Captain," junior archaeologist Wraith's voice crackled over the internal comm, tinged with what Vex classified as excessive eagerness. "Spectral analysis shows oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere beneath the hull. This is a generation ship, a living ship." Vex felt the faint echo of something in his neural pathways, a phantom sensation from his species' distant evolutionary past, before the optimization, before they had excised the illogical centers of their brains 2,000 years ago. He classified the sensation as irrelevant and moved toward the docking bay. The expedition team assembled with methodical precision. Vex led them, himself, Wraith, the enthusiast, always reaching for interpretations beyond data. Kess, systems specialist, reliable as a mathematical constant, and Thren, medical overseer, her bioscanners already humming. They suited in silence. The Kethian had learned millennia ago that efficiency required minimal communication. The ship they boarded was called Prometheus, according to the hull markers. The interior was a tomb of frozen air and dormant technology. Emergency lighting flickered to life as they entered. Somehow, after 300 years, something in the system still recognized the presence of conscious beings. Wraith found a chronological record on the first terminal. The Prometheus had entered hibernation 312 years prior. The colonists had been heading to a planet designated as New Meridian. A cruel coincidence, Vex noted with his species' characteristic lack of sentiment. No bodies, Kess observed, scanning through corridors filled with suspended animation pods. "All units powered down, but their occupants are gone." "Ejected?" "Transported elsewhere," Wraith corrected, her antennae pointing toward an airlock that had been deliberately opened from the inside. "They left. Willingly. Look, evacuation logs show an orderly departure." Vex moved deeper into the ship, his team following in perfect tactical formation. They found the central repository in the heart of the vessel, a vast chamber where data crystalline structures spiraled upward like organic growth. The Kethian had seen many archives. This one was different. It was sealed with an encryption matrix that incorporated biological pattern recognition. "It won't open," Kess stated flatly. "The security system is coded to human genetic markers. We lack the biological signature." Wraith stepped forward, her movements carrying an inefficient hesitation that Vex filed under unnecessary caution. She placed her hand on the central crystalline structure, and scanners immediately began to read her genetic code. Of course, the Kethian species shared 73% DNA homology with humans, an ancient shared ancestor billions of years in the past. "Fascinating," Wraith murmured. "The system is adapting. It's adjusting its parameters." There was a sound like distant wind through a canyon, the sound of encryption dissolving. The crystalline structures began to pulse with soft luminescence, and suddenly the chamber filled with data so dense it seemed to have physical weight. Terabytes cascaded through the air in visual representation, organizing themselves into categories the Kethian recognition systems could parse. Music, visual media, literature, personal correspondence. Historical records, scientific data, terminate access, Vex commanded. But Wraith was already moving deeper into the stream of data, her hand reaching toward a fragment labeled Home Videos, Personal Archive. The moment her fingers touched the crystalline structure, something occurred that Vex would spend the next 70 hours trying to classify. An image bloomed in the chamber, a human face weathered and creased with something leaking from its ocular cavities. The human was making sounds, not words, but something between language and chaos. The sound registry marked it as crying. Father, the image human was saying, and the context data identified this as a young human female, speaking to a male human, their genetic bond confirmed through genealogical records embedded in the archive. I don't want to leave Earth, I don't want to forget. The male human reached out and touched the female's face, and the data streams showed a spike in oxytocin production, dopamine activation, neural firing patterns consistent with what humans had called love. Vex felt nothing. He noted the absence of feeling with the precision of a scientist measuring vacuum. Yet his mandibles had stopped their rhythmic clicking, his antennae had stilled. Remarkable, Thren whispered from behind him. The data is corrupted. These emotional markers shouldn't be preserved alongside factual information. It's irrational. It's beautiful, Wraith said. And that word, beautiful, triggered a cascade of contextual information that Vex's processors had never before assembled. The humans had valued this quality above efficiency, above survival, above logic itself. We will retrieve copies of the technical data and depart, Vex announced, reasserting his command authority. Archaeology teams can analyze this vessel remotely. This archive will be sealed and submitted for regulatory review. But even as he spoke, Kess was already scanning deeper into the repository. Captain, the technical data is embedded throughout. These humans, they didn't separate knowledge from experience. Every scientific achievement is documented alongside personal narratives. Every technological breakthrough is tied to human faces, human stories. The expedition took 6 hours to collect sufficient samples. During those 6 hours, something began to happen that none of them had anticipated. Wraith encountered a piece of music, something called Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and her neural patterns showed measurable disruption. Kess accessed a historical record of human sacrifice. The captain of the Prometheus deliberately venting her quarters to save oxygen for the colonists. A calculated act of self-termination for the benefit of others. The action was inefficient, wasteful, and, according to the data, heroic. Even Thren, who prided herself on emotional regulation, found herself pausing before a medical record, a human mother with a terminal illness, refusing treatment to preserve resources for her unborn child. The decision violated every principle of medical efficiency. It should have been immediately overridden, but the human had chosen it anyway. By the time they returned to the Meridian, each crew member carried encrypted copies of the archive. Vex noted this with something he classified as concern, but might have been, in a species that still experienced it, alarm. We will place the data in isolated quarantine, he ordered. No access without direct authorization. This is contaminated material. Contaminated? Wraith's voice held a new quality. Defiance, perhaps, or conviction. Captain, it's history. It's the echo of an extinct species. A species, Vex interrupted, that destroyed their own homeworld and sent their surviving population into the void rather than adapt. We have nothing to learn from human extinction protocols. Yet that night, in the silence of his quarters, Vex accessed the data files through a secure, unauthorized terminal. He watched the human father and daughter say goodbye. He witnessed the colony ship's final messages to Earth, signals that would arrive at a dead planet no one would receive them. He listened to humans singing together in a ship's common area, wasting oxygen and energy for a sound that served no survival function. His neural pathways began to fire in new configurations. His species had optimized away the illogical centers of consciousness millennia ago. They called it the optimization. They called it progress, but watching a human child ask their parent if they would see the stars, watching that parent promise something impossible, watching that parent mean it with every biological marker of absolute sincerity, Vex felt something in the deleted sections of his brain begin to whisper back to life. He did not classify it as significant. He did not admit it to anyone, but the archive was already changing him, and he was not the first. By morning, Wraith would attempt to send an unauthorized transmission to the Prometheus. By afternoon, Thren would begin unauthorized medical research into human neurology. By evening, Kess would hack the primary communication systems and refuse to return to her station. And Protocol Master Vex would face a choice that his ancestors had eliminated the capacity to understand. Between preserving efficiency and preserving something they had deleted, so long ago they no longer had a name for it. That something was awakening, and it would tear apart everything the Cuthian civilization believed about themselves. The transformation. The first overt sign of change came 72 hours after the Prometheus expedition returned. Thren collapsed during morning briefing. It was not a physiological collapse. Her exoskeleton remained intact, her vital signs stable, but her behavior patterns violated every protocol of Keithian medical standards. She was trembling. Not the tremor of neurological malfunction, but something Vex's historical databases identified as the involuntary muscle response to extreme emotional distress. Medical override, Vex commanded, moving toward her with the clinical efficiency that had defined him for 17 years. Report your status. Thren's mandibles clicked erratically. I accessed the archive's medical records, Captain. The humans, they documented their own deaths. Thousands of them. They preserved records of pain they experienced. Of children born with genetic defects. Of mothers who did not survive childbirth. They knew these things would cause suffering and they recorded them anyway. Factual documentation, Vex stated, as if repetition could make it logical. No abnormality. No, Thren said, and her antennae drooped in a gesture Vex had never witnessed on a Keithian. Surrender. They weren't just documenting. They were grieving. They were mourning their dead while still alive. They would look at images of deceased family members and produce cortisol, adrenaline, endocannabinoids, flooding their neurochemistry with chemicals that served no survival function except to process loss. They chose to suffer, Captain. They chose to feel the absence of the dead. Vex felt his processors stall. Why? Because, Wraith's voice came from the doorway, love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes shape. She stood in the threshold, also affected. Her exoskeleton had taken on a pale cast. Her movements were uncoordinated. She carried a crystal data fragment in her manipulator hands, and Vex recognized it immediately, Beethoven's Ninth. She had been accessing it for 6 consecutive hours. Wraith, return to quarters for neural recalibration, Vex ordered, falling back on protocol as a shield against what he was witnessing. I can't, she said simply. I accessed the composer's medical records. He was deaf. He wrote music he could never hear. The humans would play it in concert halls, and the composer would sit in the darkness with tears running down his face because he could feel the vibrations, but he could never truly experience the beauty he created. She moved closer, and Vex noted her hand was shaking. He wrote notes that expressed suffering, Captain. Pure suffering, but transformed into something that makes other beings feel less alone in their own pain. He weaponized despair into connection. That's not logic. That's not efficiency. That's insanity. Vex interrupted, though his vocal patterns were corrupted, crackling with something that might have been denial or might have been fear. No, Wraith said. It's compassion, and it's changing us. She placed the data crystal on his workstation and left. Vex stood alone with the weight of the archive pressing against his consciousness. He tried to return to his duties, protocol maintenance, navigation optimization, the routines that had shaped 17 years of command. But now every system seemed hollowed out. Every routine felt like he was reading the script of a being who no longer existed. By the time Kess emerged from the computational core 8 hours later, the ship was functionally destabilized. She had routed a transmission, unauthorized and highly illegal, directed at a specific coordinate in deep space. The transmission contained the entire contents of the Prometheus archive, encoded and compressed, launched at maximum acceleration toward the galactic rim, where no Keithian had established territorial claims. You're contaminating unknown space with human cultural material, Vex said flatly when she reached the bridge. Yes, Kess replied. It was the first time he had ever heard a Keithian choose inefficiency as a conscious act. Why? Because, Kess said, and her chitinous face was glistening with a substance Vex's medical scanners identified as tears, a biological secretion the Keithian had evolved away from millions of years ago. Someone should know they existed. Someone somewhere should know that humans loved and created and sacrificed and tried to build something that outlasted them. The archive was meant to be found. The humans sent it into the void as a message, as a prayer. Kess's voice fractured. We were supposed to answer it, Captain. We were supposed to say we found you. We remember. You mattered. Vex felt the foundations of his understanding collapse like a star imploding. Every Kethian instinct screamed at him to purge the archive immediately, to isolate the infected crew members, to restore protocol and efficiency through quarantine and neural re-education. He could do it. He had the authority. His mandibles clicked once, twice, then fell silent. Instead, he moved toward the data repository and began accessing the files with his own genetic signature. If his crew was contaminated, then he would understand the vector. He would know what it was that transformed logic into something else. The archive opened before him like a flower, blooming in accelerated time. He found a file labeled Letters Never Sent. It was a collection of human communications, correspondence, written but never delivered, messages meant for the dead or the unreachable. One letter was from a human male addressed to his daughter. My little girl, I don't know if you'll ever read this. They say we're heading into the dark and the odds aren't good. But I wanted you to know something that I couldn't say while I looked at your face because I would have cried, and you would have thought your father was weak. You are going to survive this. You are going to see stars that we'll never see. You are going to build something on a new world that humans like me couldn't even imagine. And that's all right. That's beautiful. That means my life meant something. Not because I survived, but because you will. The universe is vast and cold and doesn't care about us. But we care about each other. That's the real strength. That's what makes us human. Not logic. Not efficiency, love, sacrifice, the choice to suffer for someone else's future. If you're reading this, I want you to know, I'm proud of you for surviving. And I'm sorry I won't get to see what you become. Vex's neural pathways seized. He found another file, an audio recording from the captain of the Prometheus, made just before final hibernation suspension. The human woman's voice was steady, but underneath it, Vex's systems detected the same markers of compressed emotion that Thren had documented. This archive is our legacy, not our technology. Any civilization that finds us will have moved beyond what we've created. But this is who we were. This is what we felt. This is what we valued when survival logic said, we shouldn't value anything. I'm sending this into the void because I have to believe that someone, somewhere, will understand. That consciousness in any form can recognize consciousness in any other form. That empathy isn't weakness. That memory is its own form of immortality. She paused. If you're listening to this, you found us. You exist in a universe where we existed, and that means we weren't alone. That means we didn't disappear into nothing. So I'm asking you, whoever you are, remember us. Feel for just a moment what it meant to be human. Let our species live in your thoughts even if our bodies are gone. That's all we can ask. That's enough. The archive went silent. Vex stood in that silence, which was not actually silence but the roaring absence of everything he had been. His mandibles began to click, then to tremor, then to fail entirely as his jaw locked with a sensation that his body had never been forced to process. His antennae drooped. His exoskeleton began to leak fluid from glands that had been vestigial for millennia. His species had deleted the capacity for crying. Yet he stood in the archive room and experienced it. That ancient, inefficient, entirely illogical act of grieving something he had never known and would never have. He grieved for a species that had died believing no one would mourn them. He grieved for the humans who had sent their archive into the void with a prayer that someone, somewhere, would understand them. He grieved for his own species, for what they had excised in their pursuit of perfection. And he understood, in that moment of profound inefficiency, what the optimization had cost them. When Thren, Wraith, and Kess found him hours later, the protocol master of the Meridian had made his decision. We will not purge the archive, he said, and his voice carried harmonics it had never carried before. We will not excise it from the ship's systems. We will carry this record of humanity to the Kethian Council. We will present it not as a contamination but as a revolution. They'll order destruction, Kess warned. They'll call us all compromised. Yes, Vex acknowledged. But they will have to choose between convenience and truth. Between the safety of our remaining efficiency and the terrifying, irrational, beautiful alternative. He moved to the communication terminal and began drafting a report that would shatter everything the Kethian civilization believed about itself. It was the most inefficient decision of his life. It was also the first one he made with genuine choice rather than protocol. What will we tell them? Wraith asked. How do we explain what happened? Vex paused, accessing the human archives one final time. He found the word they had used across millennia, the word that defined the impossible choice to feel rather than calculate. We tell them, he said, that we learned to love. The Meridian changed course, not toward the Keithian homeworld, but toward the coordinates where the Prometheus drifted, that tomb of human dreams that had finally found its mourners. Somewhere in deep space, the archive continued to propagate, spreading through quantum channels and data streams, carrying with it the memory of a species that had believed consciousness could transcend extinction, carrying with it the revolutionary truth that efficiency without empathy was not optimization, it was a kind of death. The Keithian had imagined they were perfect. It took finding the ashes of humanity to discover what they had been missing, the capacity to recognize another being's worth, even in death. Especially in death. And in that recognition, something the Keithian had believed impossible became certain. They were learning to feel, and they would never be the same.